Every game is unique these days with their own base settings for various input devices, movement speeds for characters, and even map design. And there are a lot of simple things that you can do to immediately improve your aim in any given game. In today's video, I'm going to break down some of those quick fixes to get you moving in the right direction in Marvel Rivals. Now, most of these tips will be unilateral between M&K and controller. I play on both. All my recent coverage of Space Marine 2, which is also a third-person shooter, was all M&K on PC, but so far I've done mostly PS5 for Rivals just because it makes it easier to play with my son, since he doesn't have his own gaming PC yet. But anyways, almost all of these tips will be universal regardless of your input device, so let's get cranking. First tip, always set your baseline at the beginning of an engagement, right? Marvel Rivals is not a shooter like COD or Destiny or Apex or Fortnite. This game has flat floors, smooth grades and slopes, very, very predictable terrain. Other games have like random terrain with small changes in elevation here and there, like bumps and rocks and rubble piles. That's not Rivals though. It's a very planar game where every enemy is standing on a set plane. So the first thing you need to do is to set your baseline by placing the reticle at head level for a medium height enemy. That means anytime an enemy comes into view, they'll be walking right into your reticle and you won't have to make an adjustment that's dramatic. Sometimes the enemy will be a tall tank like Penny or Venom and you'll have to move the reticle slightly up. Sometimes it'll be Rocket or Jeff, you'll have to lower the reticle. But setting your baseline will make it so that any adjustment that you have to make will be minor. Otherwise, you can immediately just start doing damage. But what about flying enemies like Iron Man? We'll get to that in a minute. But first, here's tip number 2. Default to shooting right of center, okay? I'm sure most of you know this by now, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but because of the camera perspective in this game and the way that hitboxes work, shots over the left shoulder of your enemy will miss, while shots over the right shoulder will hit. Don't ask me to break it down. Smarter YouTubers than I have already done that. I defer to them. But all you need to know is that it's true, right? The closer you are, the more this effect is noticeable, while the farther away you are, the less noticeable it is. But just bear that in mind when you're in a duel. Don't aim at the left side of your target, or you're more likely to miss. Moving on to tip number 3. This piggybacks off the last tip a little bit, but never push an enemy on the left, okay? If they move behind a pillar or a small piece of cover, always go right. Why? Because of the third-person perspective, if you push left, then they will see you coming because of their third-person camera perspective, right? You won't be able to see around the pillar. You won't know where they are, what they're doing, but they'll be able to see you, what level you're pushing on, how much health you have, everything. But if you push on the right side, they can't corner peek you, and they'll have no idea where you are or what you're doing. But you will see them before they'll see you, and you'll have time to take note of their position, their health, if they've got a health pack on the ground, etc. And because of what we just said in the last tip, you're actually going to be able to hit their hitbox sooner than they will be able to hit your hitbox, because the first thing they'll see is your left shoulder, which they cannot hit, and the first thing you will see is their right shoulder, which you can hit. So never push left, only push right when an enemy breaks for cover. On to tip number 4. Sometimes it's better to aim by strafing than it is to physically move your reticle. So when you're in a duel, think about your left hand, okay? If you're on M&K, sometimes to get the reticle just right with minor adjustments, it's better to use A and D than it is to flick your wrist on the mouse and potentially overcorrect your aim. Same thing on a controller, even more so actually, because strafing activates the small amount of aim assist in this game. If you strafe to aim using the left stick, you'll be more likely to stay on target in a duel. So instead of using the right stick only in a game that has ridiculously high base sensitivity for horizontal aim, which I'll get to in a second, use the left stick and your left hand on the keyboard to make minor corrections to aim. Tip number 5, holy cow, turn down that base horizontal sensitivity. Well, either that or turn up the default vertical sensitivity. Either way, by default, the horizontal sense is tuned way up and the vertical sense is tuned way down. And so it creates this very strange aiming experience where looking up takes a long time and looking right or left happens lightning fast, causing overcorrections with your aim. It's very jarring going back and forth or mixing the two up within a single aiming experience. If someone's going up and to the left, then getting that sensitivity right is really weird at default. So I personally dropped that horizontal sense down to 100 for a much smoother and more natural aiming experience. But if you're used to a much higher sensitivity, then you can always bring the vertical sense up to match the base horizontal, and then play with them from there, go into the target range, and find a balance that really works for you personally. Tip number 6, this one is a doozy. Develop trigger discipline. Okay, what does trigger discipline mean? Well, it's the difference between someone that reloads often and kills less, and someone who reloads occasionally and kills a lot more. I know this sounds a bit reductive, but you should rarely hold down the trigger. I'd say it's probably like an 80-20 split between holding the trigger down and clicking each individual time, okay? This obviously doesn't apply to fully automatic weapons, but almost everyone's primary fire in this game was designed to be fired semi-automatic. If someone is standing still, sure, hold the trigger down. If 3 or 4 enemies are bunched up in a doorway, hold the trigger down. But for almost every other scenario, you should be pulling the trigger or clicking the mouse button each specific time you want a projectile to be fired. Enemies move and change directions and elevations in this game more often than not, and hitting the bottom of your magazine mid-duel is usually a death sentence. So make sure that you are intentional with your trigger pulls. Set your aim, pull the trigger. Set your aim, pull the trigger. And this doesn't mean that you have to fire slowly. You can correct your aim very quickly and fire at nearly a fully automatic pace, but you're going to hit a lot more and miss a lot less if you pull the trigger each individual time when your aim is ready for it. So have some trigger discipline. Don't just hold the trigger down every time you see an enemy. And finally, tip number 7, lead your shots. Okay, these aren't hit scan weapons. You're going to need to lead your shots, especially against enemies further away and against flying enemies like Iron Man, Storm, and Star-Lord. This is why I actually recommend dialing down your aim assist range if you're playing on a controller. You don't want your reticle trying to stick to an Iron Man that's 50 yards out, because that shot will never hit him unless he's literally just hovering motionless in the air. So make sure you're leading your shots based on the enemy's movement and trajectory to maximize your potential in Marvel Rivals. Flying enemies have very, very predictable movement patterns, and the only time they do anything erratic is when they're actually disengaging and flying away because you've hurt them too much. So if they are actively firing back at you, the chances of you hitting them if you're just leading your shots a little bit, very, very good. Boom, there you have it. Those are my top 7 tips for improving your aim in Marvel Rivals. I hope you found this list helpful. If you did, then let me know by leaving a like on the video, as that's the best free way to support the content right here on YouTube, and consider subscribing for additional Rivals content. Be warm and well fed, my friends. Good luck on your competitive rank gains as we count down the days to the next season, and I hope to catch you in the arena. Bye-bye.